Hello, everyone, and welcome to Webinar Wednesday. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Ria Stark. I'm the digital engagement manager here at TLC. Ooh, you'd think I'd get that right, as how many times I've said that. Today, we're going to be discussing a hot topic, which is what to do in a ransomware attack. So cybercrime is on the rise, and you may have seen recent news stories about libraries and school systems all over the country recently falling victim to these cyber attacks. It's stressful, to be sure, but hopefully after today, you can start to feel a little bit more confident in handling and staying ahead of those ransomware attacks at your library. Before I introduce our speaker, let me run through my usual reminders. First, we are live this Wednesday afternoon. As you can tell, we already have a blooper. And so thank you for joining us live on this busy afternoon. As a live participant, you have the opportunity to ask our panelists questions. So at any point throughout the presentation, if you have something that you'd like to ask, please add that into the questions panel, and we'll get to those at the end of the session. If you would like to rewatch this webinar or share it with a colleague, we do encourage that. It is being recorded, and you can catch the replay starting tomorrow at tlcdelivers.com/webinars. And I'll mention that link again at the end of the session. And finally, before you log out today, please be sure to snag those handouts for more information. We have 2 really great customer case studies available for you to read about ransomware attacks and about keeping up to date with emerging security laws. So be sure to download those towards the end of the session. All right, we do also have one disclaimer that I want to share on this session before we get started. Our primary objective today is to help raise awareness for what a ransomware attack can look like and provide a guideline for quickly responding during such an attack. We'll share the best practices that we use at TLC for our own systems, but because every information system is different, it is always a good idea to check with your own technology teams and come up with the best plan for your organization. All right, with that being said, please let me introduce our panelist today, Joe Reimers, our sales engineer for Carl Solution. Joe is one of the many vendorarians we have here at TLC. He is on the vendor side now, but has many years of experience on the front lines in libraries, which I will let him share more in his introduction. Joe, thank you so much for joining us for Webinar Wednesday today.
Thank you, Ria. I want to start off with a couple of numbers, $450,000 and $284,000. There's also a picture of a passport there. What do these have to do with what we're talking about today? Well, a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, a public library system was hit by a ransomware attack. This was earlier when ransomware was somewhat newer and not quite as pervasive, but a public library got hit to the tune of $450,000. That was the ransom that was held up. They were over a barrel. They didn't have any other choices. And after evaluating things, they ended up paying that ransom. And that's a lot of money to pay, but that was for them the best option at the time. More recently, the Los Angeles Unified School District was hit with a targeted ransomware attack where they were told, pay up or else your sensitive documents are going to end up on the internet. Los Angeles Unified School District opted not to pay, and 284,000 sensitive documents, including unredacted passports, ended up on the internet. And I'm mentioning this because that is the real world price that ransomware attacks can inflict on libraries, on school systems. And more libraries, school systems, colleges, and universities are being specifically targeted for ransomware attacks. So why would a sales engineer be talking about ransomware attacks and talking about information security in general? And for this, I'm really going back to my roots. I got started in libraries working the IT help desk and then becoming an ILS and systems administrator. And for that a lot of that involved dealing with information security, dealing with viruses, dealing with other malware attacks. And then later on, when I was in an academic library, coordinating with campus IT on information security. We had to live through a fairly major security breach while I was at the university. And so all of us who are involved with systems administration at any level were brought up much further and much more quickly on information security best practices. And then since coming to TLC, that's carried forward not only out of personal interest, but TLC also requires every single staff member to undergo annual information security awareness training, which is updated annually to account for the latest threats, the latest malware, the latest techniques, the latest things to look for. Because these cyber criminals out there are getting more and more and more sophisticated, and it's harder and harder even for the really experienced, really savvy system administrators to figure out what's real and what is an attack. So today's topics, in very broad strokes, we're going to learn how to respond to a ransomware attack and learn how to prepare for a ransomware attack, because half the battle is preparation. How do you know when you've been hit by ransomware? Go ahead.
Sorry, Joe, don't mean to interrupt you. Before we jump into this content, speaking of having a good plan put in place, we do have a quick poll for everybody. In just a few moments, a poll will appear on your screen, and it's whether or not you have had discussions with your IT team about what to do in a ransomware attack. So yes, you've had those discussions, you have a good action plan, or maybe it's come up once or twice, but you don't necessarily have a set plan in place. Maybe you don't have an action plan, and that's why you're here today to learn more. Or possibly you don't have an IT team. We do hear that from some of our library customers that don't have dedicated IT. So we have that option there as well. So we have a number of folks on the call today, and just wanted to gauge where everyone stands in terms of the audience and what conversations you've had so far with your teams. So we'll wait just a moment for those results to come in. Ooh, it looks like the no, that's why I'm here today is so far leading the crowd. We've got 42% don't have an action plan. 29% say it's come up once or twice, but maybe aren't feeling comfortable yet. 16% do have a plan, and 13%, sad face, don't have an IT team. All right. Thanks, everybody. Joe, I'll turn it back over to you, and I'll interrupt you at least once more before we're done.
That's quite all right. Sorry, I get into the flow, and you know how it goes. So the first question is, how do you know you've actually been hit with ransomware? And on the screen, I show two fairly good representative samples of what a ransomware warning screen will look like. It will tell you that your files have been encrypted, and will give you all sorts of dire warnings that you have to pay certain amount of money, usually in Bitcoin, or else very bad things will happen. And this can vary anywhere from the decryption key being destroyed, so you will never, ever be able to recover your files, to we're going to leak all of your files onto the internet, or possibly we're going to jack up the price even further until you finally pay. There's a variety of ways that they try to get you to pay, but they all involve encrypting your files and then telling you to pay the ransom. Now, in other cases, before this comes up, there are sometimes early warning signs that something may be amiss. And it's not necessarily ransomware. It may not be anything at all, but it could be an early warning sign that's worth paying attention to. And that's if your computer starts acting weird. And I don't mean normally, Windows just sometimes acts weird, because that's what computers do. But you'll notice sometimes your machine is acting unusually weird. So maybe it's rebooting at random times without applying Windows updates. Maybe all of a sudden, you're doing nothing and it gets really slow, and the fan starts churning really hard. In those cases, when you're not sure what's going on and your computer is acting weird, immediately contact your IT help desk. If you don't have IT help desk, the first thing I would recommend doing is running some sort of malware scan or virus scan, just to make sure that's not what it is. However, if you get a warning that your files are encrypted, you have been hit with a ransomware attack, and it's time to respond. And it's important to respond immediately. Do not delay, because the longer you delay, the worse it gets. We recently saw a major library vendor get hit with a ransomware attack. They were down for 2 weeks, and this is a well-prepared, well-equipped outfit that knows what they're doing and has a lot of resources in place. That's what I mean by saying any sort of delay can really bring it down hard. There are 3 steps to responding to a ransomware attack: contain, communicate, and recover. Sorry, had a wrong angle on my camera. Contain, communicate, recover. We start with containment. That is holding in the spread of the ransomware. Your computer has already been infected. You want to make sure it does not spread further. So if you are able, the very first thing to do is get off the network. If you're plugged in with an Ethernet cable, unplug the Ethernet cable. Just physically remove it from the computer. If you are attached to a wireless network and you are able to turn off wireless on your computer, or at least disconnect from the network on your computer, do so. However, a lot of IT administrators recommend that you not shut down your computer, because shutting down and restarting your computer is what causes Windows to grab onto any additional hooks that make it that much harder to resolve and remove. So disconnect from the network if you can, but do not restart your computer. And as mentioned, you want to get off the network, because right away, ransomware is going to start looking not only for your My Documents folder and your Downloads folder. It's going to start looking for network drives. It's going to start looking for shared folders. It's going to start looking for any Dropbox or Box or Google Drive folders that you have mapped as a local drive. It's also going to look for USB thumb drives and external USB drives. Ransomware looks for any opportunity it can find to spread, and that, especially those shared drives, is how it is able to infiltrate an entire organization so quickly and so effectively. And that's why containment is critical. Equally critical is the second step: communicate. First, if you have an IT department, notify that department immediately. And the reason for that, again, is so that they can begin their containment protocols. So if you have shared folders or network drives, in many instances, upon learning of a ransomware attack, IT departments will disconnect those network drives and alert everyone that the network drives have been disconnected in order to contain this outbreak, because the more people get infected, the bigger the outbreak, the more damage it does. So they want to keep it very localized. In addition to notifying IT, you may want to notify other stakeholders per local policy. So you may need to notify other departments. You may need to notify your supervisor, and it is generally a good idea to notify your library systems vendor and other related vendors who may have servers or provide services to you. But because we are a library automation company, because we do ILSs, it is important that if you're a TLC customer, it's important that you bring us into the conversation. If you are not a TLC customer, please speak with your vendor, bring them into the conversation to help contain any spread and isolate your systems from any spread, so that services to your patrons are minimally impacted. Then the third component is recovery. Getting hit with a ransomware virus is a very serious deal, and a document, once encrypted, is going to stay encrypted unless you're able to get the encryption key. Generally speaking, however, if your computer is hit with ransomware, it is a good idea to consider that computer basically hosed. The documents are encrypted. you have no way of getting a hold of those documents again once they are encrypted, unless you pay the ransom. And who knows what else it may have done to your system. It tends to, a lot of these malware groups that put out ransomware and other types of malware work together. They share information back and forth on the dark web. And if you're hit with one, a lot of times they'll call home and bring in others, especially if they can get it in at the Windows or other system level. And it's really bad news, and it is very, very hard to recover from that. So there are certain things that IT experts, including the FBI and including other federal agencies, recommend that you not do. And this is both federal agencies as well as IT professionals who have dealt with dozens or hundreds of ransomware attacks. The very first piece of advice they give is do not pay the ransom. And the reason you don't want to pay the ransom is that these are criminals, they're crooks, they're there to steal from you. And in a very great many instances, they'll take your money, but they won't release the decryption key. They won't release your file. They won't fill their end of the bargain. Or in some instances, they do fulfill their end of the bargain, but they leave a piece in there so they can go right back and re-encrypt the same company all over again without anybody having to do anything, because now they know that they can soak the company or the business or whoever for even more money. But there are many, many documented instances of people hit up with ransomware who pay the ransom and never hear from the attackers again and never recover their files. There was also a case of an entity in the financial services industry not too terribly long ago. They got hit with the type of ransomware where if they didn't pay the ransom, their customer files would be posted on the internet. And these were like financial files from a bank or credit union. So they paid the ransom, and within a week, their files were still out there on the dark web. So very, very few good things can happen from paying the ransom. The library that I mentioned at the first slide got lucky. They got their stuff back. They were able to recover. It worked out for them. But in generally speaking, there can be good news, but it very frequently is not good news if you pay the ransom. We also do not recommend trying to recover encrypted files, or at least Joe personally does not recommend trying to recover encrypted files, because without the decryption key, it's basically impossible. And trying to delay so that you can install virus removal software and such is seldom successful and can often make the spread even worse. And specifically, inserting thumb drives is, it's very important that you don't do that, because the minute the thumb drive goes in, even if it has antivirus software on it, even if it has other components on it, as soon as it goes in there, the ransomware is going to hit it and use it as another vector to spread that ransomware even further. So we generally recommend not paying the ransom and not trying to use software or use tools or thumb drives to recover that machine, unless you are using that thumb drive as a bootable thumb drive to restore and install a brand new Windows image. So what we recommend instead is first engaging your local disaster recovery plan, because a ransomware attack is a disaster. It falls under that definition that would account for a disaster recovery plan. As we saw, that major library services vendor was brought down for 2 weeks. That is a big deal, and it rippled across the entire industry. Pretty much everybody felt it. So engage your local disaster recovery plan. And then flatten and reinstall is what I was talking about, where you wipe out everything on the hard drive, reformat your hard drive, and then reinstall the OS, and then restore from backups, put a new image on if you re-image your computers, and go from scratch. But generally speaking, any document, any file that is on your computer has to be considered lost. With that, I'm going to turn things back to Ria for a moment.
Thanks, Joe. So you just mentioned disaster recovery plan, and so we do have one more poll for our attendees here today to find out if you have a disaster recovery plan. If you do and you know about it, hit yes. If you don't, hit no. Or if you're not really sure, let us know that too. And especially for those of you who said that you don't have an IT team, this might be something worth talking about with your vendors to come up with the best disaster recovery plan for your system. And if you would like extra advice or extra help on figuring out what that looks like, we will be putting on another webinar mid-November that discusses this very thing. So be sure to come back and join us next month for part 2 of our cybersecurity webinar series. And so while we're waiting for those poll results, I do see that we have a couple of questions have come in so far. Please keep them coming. I will hold them all until the end just to let Joe get through his presentation, but please keep adding questions and we'll have some great discussion following up. All right, it looks like 45%, our majority is they're not sure if they have a disaster recovery plan. 32% say yes, they do, and 23% say no, they don't. So for those of you in that not sure or no category, please join us again for our next webinar in another month. All right, Joe, I'll turn it back over to you for preparing for ransomware attacks. Words today.
Thank you, Ria. The good news, if you do not currently have a disaster recovery plan, it is never too late to start thinking about it, and it is never too late to take matters into your own hands as well. So how can you prepare for ransomware? It begins with a culture of security. As mentioned when I was introducing myself, we have information security awareness training within our company. A large number of other organizations have information security awareness training. A lot of times this training is going to be aspected to your particular use case, your particular environment, but they almost always address dealing with threat emails or phishing text messages, people trying to get you to click on links that you shouldn't, opening bad attachments. So this is a really strong, important component just to help keep that ransomware away, because that's how the ransomware gets in to begin with a lot of times, is through that. So that ongoing training and that ongoing awareness is a really, really good first line of defense. So is embracing best practices. So when you embrace good password policies, for instance, when you embrace other good security practices involving permissions and who shares what data with whom, all of these things can really help mitigate a ransomware attack. I have a friend who I've known for a long time who works in the IT industry, and he's dealt with literally hundreds of ransomware attacks. And he has said that companies that have very good IT practices and very good information security practices that have things compartmentalized properly typically suffer only very minor repercussions from ransomware attacks. It only affects a handful of people and does not bring the business to its knees. And that's very useful because it saves a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of energy in the long run, and keeps things moving without bringing the entire place to a screeching halt. The last one I want to mention is a little bit sensitive, but it's important that there be a culture where people are encouraged to report security breaches, especially ransomware attacks, in a timely manner, very quickly, and not be concerned that things are going to blow back on them. Because as I mentioned, ransomware moves quickly, and it is important to get ahead of that ransomware before it can do too much damage. The worst thing that can happen is that a person gets hit with ransomware and is so worried about what HR is going to say, what their boss is going to say, what other people are going to say, that they don't say anything at all. And those are the situations that can really bring a library or a school district or an enterprise to its knees. So it's important to foster a culture of security awareness and security responsibility in a way that is very proactive and positive toward reporting of security incidents, especially because these crooks are so good at what they do. They're so good at faking emails from HR. They're targeted. They know what's going on, so they'll send emails that look like they come from your HR department right around this time of year, and they will say things like, "Here's the PDF attachment for this year's open enrollment period." And that's totally not what it is. They're trying to get a ransomware on you, but it looks like an email from HR. It comes from HR, and it's an open enrollment package, and you're expecting it. And that's how they nail you. And it's really, really tricky to figure that out sometimes. And that's why, we don't want to make people feel foolish and guilty if they get hit. It's important that they say, "Look, this happened. It caught me off guard. Please help," and deal with it, deal with the attack. The next piece that's really important to remember, backups. If you need to have it, back it up. Hard stop. If you have an IT department, it's worth coordinating with that IT department. So if you have personnel records, if you have lists of patrons, like new registrations that you keep outside your ILS, if you have other reports, if you have your acquisitions lists that you share with your selectors outside your system, payroll, anything like that. If you need to have it, back it up. If you have your planning materials for summer reading and it's only on your computer, back it up, because if you're hit with a ransomware attack, you have to assume that it's going to be wiped out. So coordinate with IT if you can. If you don't have an IT department, or you can't coordinate with IT, or they're unwilling to talk, set up your own backup. It can be something as simple as getting USB drives, and I recommend go to the store, buy a brand new drive, and take it out of the blister packaging yourself, because that is the only way that you will know 100% for sure that it is an uninfected clean drive. But just plug in your thumb drive, back up what you need to back up, and then unplug the thumb drive, or get an external hard drive, plug it in, back it up, unplug it. It's important not to leave it plugged in, because the ransomware is going to come in and try to encrypt it. But if you're backing up files you absolutely have to have and only plugging in the drive when you need to plug it in, that gives you a much, much, much better chance of being able to recover fully and recover quickly. And then have a disaster recovery plan. As we mentioned, it is individualized for any given information system. It's difficult to say do this and do this and do this, because there are local laws, there are local rules, and every library's own network, own system, own rules and requirements is individualized, which is why it has to be localized. But we have some ideas that we're going to talk about with you next month, and it is the topic of our next information security Wednesday webinar, and I'm really looking forward to delving into security recovery, or into disaster recovery plans with all of you. So in conclusion, remember, contain, communicate, and then restore. The quick response is the key to containment, and preparation is the key to effective recovery. And with that, I'm going to pass things, further resources before I pass it back to Ria. This will be in the handouts, but we have links to the FBI and cybersecurity infrastructure security agencies' websites that contain lots more good information on how to deal with and how to mitigate ransomware attacks and how to protect yourselves. And I recommend that all of you check these out for further information. There are lots of other good resources on the internet, but I like starting with the top experts. With that, we'll go back to Ria.
Thanks, Joe. And as you mentioned, these links will be available in handouts tomorrow with the recording. You'll get a copy of the slides and you'll be able to click directly to that link. We do have one more poll question for you, which is whether or not you are feeling confident with your security awareness. So in just a moment, that poll will pop up on your screen, and I want to know where you fall on that scale of confidence. Are you very confident? Maybe you're staying up to date on the latest security issues. Maybe you're feeling fairly confident. Maybe not wouldn't panic if your computer starts acting weird, or is this all just very overwhelming to you and you might want additional assistance later? So no judgment, just want to know where you're at on that scale. And as we've been chatting, I have seen several questions come in, so we will start getting into those in just a moment. If you do have a question, please feel free to add it into the questions panel, and we will get to those shortly. So I think we have our poll results are back. 76% are in that fairly confident phase. It looks like a nice bell curve there, with the 11% feeling very confident and 13% feeling overwhelming. I get it. I was overwhelmed with ransomware before we started doing our annual security training at TLC as well, and probably would group myself in that fairly confident, but it's always good to stay up to date. All right, now we're going into our questions section, and I do want to mention that we have an additional speaker who is called in to join us, who may also jump in to answer some of our questions. Our very own Chief Technology Officer, Justin Dulzanizer, is calling in, and so you may hear his voice answer a couple questions. All right, so the first question we have is in the event that a computer or device is compromised, would it be best to completely get rid of the device? Is there a way to wipe off the device?
So there are ways to wipe off the device. Depending on what the device is, there are different options for that. In most cases, ransomware is going to hit a computer, so a Windows. I believe there are also Mac OS and possibly Linux targeted, but for the most part, we're dealing with Windows. And that's simply a case of taking a recovery disk or a recovery USB drive. And in that case, you would shut off the computer, insert the drive, boot from the thumb drive, and then launch the Windows recovery tool that way.
Okay.
So you don't need to throw it away. You can just hit factory reset, and then there should be instructions on your manufacturer's website on how to do that on your computer.
Good. So there is an answer for that. A follow-up question, or I should say a similar question from a different participant, wants to know what they should do with lost thumb drives, especially in the library. There tends to be a lot of very innocent lost thumb drives that may have contact information. Is there a safe way to get those back to the correct owners?
Justin, do you want to handle that one?
Yeah, happy to jump in on that.
All right.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Yep.
We can hear you, Justin.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so lost thumb drives, that's a particularly tricky issue because obviously, as Joe has indicated, thumb drives are a little bit dangerous. They certainly can be. In fact, there's an attack vector that is somebody bringing a thumb drive into a location, leaving it around so it looks like a lost thumb drive, and hoping somebody plugs it in, and thereby infecting the system while they're trying to do something, do a favor to whoever lost the thumb drive. This is the kind of stuff they go over in the security awareness training of these different types of threat models. They play on our good nature, they're very convenient, et cetera. So generally, taking a thumb drive whose provenance is unknown and plugging it into any system connected to your network is a pretty bad idea, even if you think you're doing the right thing. So, we certainly wouldn't encourage people to do that. Depending on your kind of like tech savviness, your local policies and how much IT support you have, there are some things you can do if you have like what's called an air gap device, which is, a device that has kind of a sandbox setup with no access to any other systems or anything on the network. You could use that to check if the contents of the thumb drive is legit or not, and then wipe that device and start over afterwards. But generally speaking, unless you're really confident like that, with that, you have a sort of plan for that or IT support for that, that gets a little dicey and it requires special equipment and special setups and all that. So generally speaking, although we want to be helpful to each other, unless you feel like you can pull that off, and caveat here, we don't advise it. Your best bet is to treat a completely unknown thumb drive as a potential threat. And it's really on whoever lost that thumb drive, if it's legitimate, to have their own copy of whatever was on that thumb drive. So there's kind of the tinfoil hat answer to that. I think it's best avoided, since it's kind of a known trick to get ransomware into, especially like a commercial or public service organization.
Great, thank you, Justin. That's good to know. Despite our better nature to want to help, it's sometimes better just put it in the lost and found and hope the owner reclaims it.
And since thumb drives often look alike, I would add to that it's probably a good idea to make a little note of the date and the location where it was found in the library. So it was, found in the computer lab 1 on station 3 on this date, and just tape that to the thumb drive. And that way, if somebody comes along looking for it, you at least can verify that that's the approximate time and place they lost it. It's something. It's better than nothing, but it's a lot safer than plugging it in.
Yep. Good point, Joe. All right, we've got quite a few questions, so I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. If our IT has network drives in the cloud or in the future using OneDrive, do I need to make my own backup? Can ransomware or viruses spread to the backup or OneDrive?
The short answer is yes, they can spread. That is a really good conversation to have with your local IT concerning you're backing up to the cloud. Are they backing up what's in the cloud to another place? Usually, if it's done properly, you're going to, even with a cloud drive, that cloud drive is going to have a redundant backup somewhere else that they can restore from. If they don't have that, then you will probably want to talk to them about doing that and possibly maintaining your own backup thumb drive for your own personal stuff. So I would not assume. I would ask whoever is responsible for maintaining that OneDrive or maintaining that cloud drive.
And another question related to that, I'm going to combine two questions here. Someone's wanting to know about backups to the cloud, and whether someone else wants to know whether or not it's safer to have patron data in the cloud or on site. You want to speak to that, Joe?
Yeah, so very briefly, it once again depends. I would say if you're going to back up patron data to the cloud, you want to make sure that it is a secure, isolated cloud that is dedicated to just whatever information you have, as opposed to just generally broad being in the cloud. So I know, for instance, if you're backing up using somebody like Dropbox or Box or a similar group like that, that is going to be isolated to your particular group. And there are a number of companies out there that do that sort of thing. So I would feel more secure in backing up to one of those than I would say to backing up to Google, where it's, unless you have an enterprise account that is isolated, if you're just backing up to your own personal Google Drive, I'm not 100% convinced that that's not getting the full Google analysis treatment, where they're kind of spying, if not at the contents, at least at some of the other big picture stuff. So you can do cloud very securely. Again, speaking for TLC, our cloud provider is Oracle, and our contract with Oracle for those cloud providers is that individualized, highly localized, where nobody else is peeking in. And so it is very firmly walled off. And those types of, that type of infrastructure is safe, and it is redundant, and it is backed up. And we know that if anyone in our Oracle cloud infrastructure were to get hit with a ransomware attack, we know that we would be able to recover the cloud side of things very quickly and very effectively.
Yeah. And continue that thought, the case studies that we have in our handouts show two examples of that as well. For TLC Cloud Services, our Oracle-based hosting system, there's two stories that talk about those exact instances of being able to back up or switch to the cloud in order to have more of that secure interaction. So grab those handouts before you leave.
And one thought on local systems. If you are going to do locally, and locally has the benefit of you having absolute control of it, the flip side to that is, and I don't, given a situation like, for instance, Hurricane Ian, which just completely obliterates everything in its path, if you do not have off-site backup for that in a secure location, that backup is also going to be lost. So that's just something else to think about, and that's one of the strengths of cloud, is that all of that is geographically distributed so that there is a greater opportunity to recover.
Right. Good point. Our next question is, if your library computers are frozen with deep freeze, can they spread ransomware? It looks like a client specific.
It can spread ransomware. I don't know if it can penetrate the deep freeze locks on the computer itself, but as long as it's in memory, it has the potential, if it can see other network areas, it could spread out, and it can absolutely hit any thumb drive that gets plugged into it. Justin, do you have any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's generally correct. And a good idea is to really look into the guidance from the vendor on that type of stuff and not make assumptions about it. That's the first caveat that I would give there. But a lot of those systems are intended to allow you to roll something back to a known state, as opposed to being themselves a kind of like security line of defense. So really what Joe was saying, I think, is accurate, which is, unless you return it to the known kind of deep freeze state, assuming that's how the software is configured and being used, there still could be a period of time where it's active trying to do other things to other systems. So I would say that likely gives you more capabilities around recovery than it does around like the kind of initial period of prevention. But making some assumptions about the capabilities of the deep freeze software there in that answer. So the caveat again is, read the documentation on the best use and practices for that system.
And related to that, I would say, and this is a little bit more advanced, but in a lot of places, it just makes good security sense to have public computers isolated from staff computers so that they don't even talk to each other on the internet, that they're segmented off, so that even if a deep freeze enabled computer were to get hit with ransomware, there are several layers in place to keep that from ever reaching the staff side of the house.
That's a great segue into the next question. Oh, go ahead, Justin.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, if I could add to that, that's something I really wanted to reiterate too, is in the ounce of prevention, pound of cure category. Joe raised a really good point, which is if you have devices that don't need to be connected to each other, don't connect them, because you are always just sort of limiting your risk when you do that. So like that's a perfect example. A public available computer is obviously at higher risk than one behind the circulation desk or certainly in a back room. And so similar to how they're physically isolated by like that, don't set up a file share drive between those computers, or certainly don't leave one enabled if you have to use it on a temporary basis, unless you have a really good reason to do so, because you're just putting the other systems at extended risk, right? So I think that's a kind of a key point. And it's like really, if you think about it, if somebody is sick, don't have them cough on you. Don't put an at-risk system in proximity to one, especially if it's more kind of operationally critical.
Yep. And I think you may have answered this next question with that, but you may have more to add. So this one is, have you ever experienced or heard of ransomware that jumps from system to system over the network? I'm incredibly confident in being able to smash a single system, but if our entire network got locked down, I'd be at a near loss.
It jumps over the network through the use of shared drives and shared folders. That's how it connects. The thing to remember about ransomware is that it has exactly the same permissions as the user who is logged in when the ransomware strikes. So the ransomware is tied to the user's permission. So as far as the computer is concerned, if I'm logged in and I get hit, the ransomware has exactly the same permissions on the TLC network that I have. So what I am able to access, the ransomware is able to access. What I am not able to access, the ransomware is not able to access. So every shared drive that I can access and load my files and save my files, that is exactly what it can hit. If I get hit and I am disconnected from TLC's network because I haven't signed into the VPN and I'm just working on a local PowerPoint, that's not going to bring down TLC until I connect to TLC's network. I hope that's a good answer for that.
Yeah, and one thing I would add to that real quick, if I could, sorry, Rhea.
Yeah,
that's definitely correct. But you will be surprised at how connected machines on a network are, even if they're not potentially even like file share. Like that's definitely the most common method. But there may be other kind of protocols connecting or things available that Windows has that it can use to spread. So it's not to be again kind of intimidating and alarmist here, but I think the key answer is yes. Any network connected devices are at risk of spreading each other because a lot of the malware is getting more sophisticated about escalating its privileges from the first position that it gets and using non-standard protocols, even like kind of internal Windows protocols and other system protocols to spread, as well as doing things like trying to send emails and calendar invites and other things that all of which can be different types of vectors of attack. So being able to restore a local system is good, but if that local system isn't totally air-gapped and disconnected from the network, it's good to assume you do have a potential threat to anything really addressable from that computer and to prepare and act accordingly, I would say.
Right. Yep. Thanks for adding that in, Justin. We do have two last questions and a comment. So I'll do the first quick question, which is whether the slides will be made available later. The answer is yes, but not until tomorrow when the recording is available. And you can get that at tlcdelivers.com/webinars. And since you signed up for this, you'll also receive an email reminding you when that's available. It's an easy question. I can get that one. The next one is, what resources would you recommend for libraries to start getting more informed about cybersecurity? There is a lot of literature out there, but it would be great to have something catered to libraries. Thanks.
So I'm not aware of anything specifically library-centric, which is one of the reasons I approached Rhea about maybe we should start something library-centric. I think there's a lot of value in that. And I think there's a lot of value in having both vendors and librarians involved in this conversation, because as we saw with, not just the libraries getting ransomware hit, but also vendors getting ransomware hit, I think there's room for a lot of growth on that. And I realize you're looking for a page of things that you can provide. So we'll start with the FBI and the CISA. I think that's what it was. I can't remember the exact acronym. That's a good start. I think we'll have a couple of internal conversations about ways that we can advance that. We absolutely welcome input from you on how we can help advance that, because I think just as a community resource, that would be tremendously valuable.
Yes.
I know I have a handful of places that I like to go for my own purposes, but some of them are for profit, and I don't want to favor any vendors over any other vendors. It's not in the library space, but it's general. But like we have, TLC has its information security vendor that has done a tailored job for us, not just for broad information security, but also for us to understand various state laws as they pertain to information security and privacy and so forth. But there are a number of those providers out there, and a number of them are very, very good at what they do. but I think this is an opportunity for a much broader conversation, and
Yeah.
we'll see if we can have a more comprehensive answer by the time the next webinar comes around. And I'll take that on my shoulders to figure out how that's going to look moving forward.
Yeah, and on that note, we do have one more poll, and then I'll circle back because we have a couple of questions. But the last poll we ask at the end of every webinar is whether or not you would like more information from TLC. And I think that this is a great way to be able to start those conversations that Joe is talking about. And it starts with those tailored, customized conversations with your vendor. So if you want more information, you want us to reach out to you, maybe you have more questions or very specific concerns to your library, go ahead and hit yes, please contact me, and we'll be able to reach out and start to fulfill that information leading up to our next webinar in November. So we will leave that up on the screen for just a minute to give folks a chance to respond. And I'm going to go down for our next question. Oh, actually, excuse me, someone mentioned the SNSI site has some library-centric security information. And I will post the link into the chat for everybody that they just shared in the questions channel. Well, let me, if I cannot paste that. So I'm going to ask my producer, the other Justin, to please share that link into the chat, and you'll all be able to see that soon. The next question, we have a few more have come in. First, our comment was, I only am here because we dealt with that book supplier ransomware attack, and it was a nightmare. I wanted to know the ins and outs of a ransomware attack, and this has helped a lot. Thank you. You are welcome. Thank you for joining us. We did get another question that came in. Could we get technical updates from TLC when software components are being updated? That would help a lot in our discussions with IT.
So in terms of when software components are updated, our two primary products, we have two primary products, one being library.solution, the other being Carl. And Carl is kind of more my wheelhouse. Library.solution is entirely web-based. So if you are a library.solution customer, there should not be any software impact when systems get updated. If you are a Carl solution customer, when you install a new release, or when you ask us to install a new release or manage that, there is typically going to be a software update that will occur automatically when Carl gets updated. The server then pushes down that software update, but that would be that conversation to have with your local IT about the software getting updated at that time. But because you're able to schedule it, you're able to communicate with IT that things are going to happen at this time, and this is what's going to happen. If you have further questions about that, then you'll want to, and you're a Carl customer, obviously, you'll want to talk to Martin. If you are not a TLC customer, absolutely have these conversations with your ILS vendors. These are important conversations to have, and it's important that you have that level of trust with your vendors because they can help you. You know, I worked for another vendor before coming to TLC, and the one thing I've seen across the board with every vendor is they want to help you. They want to be there for you. They want to work with you on these security issues. So please engage us as your vendors to help you with these conversations. That's part of what we're here for.
Yes, exactly. I second that. And it was a Carl customer that wrote in, but great answer for everybody as well. Get in touch with your vendors. Let us know what you need, and we can work to make a good solution for everybody. All right, that was the last question I saw come in. So I do have a couple of closing notes. But first, thank you all for your time this afternoon. It's great to be able to get updates and know what's going on in cybersecurity. And we thank you for your time to be able to join us. So Webinar Wednesday is taking a short break as we gear up for TLCU, which is our annual user conference. And you can still register for TLCU at tlcu.live/register. If you are one of our TLC customers, it's November 1st through the 3rd, and will be taking place virtually. And we'll be returning to Webinar Wednesday, mid-November, following TLCU with the webinar that we've mentioned several times throughout this program, which will be on disaster recovery. And we're inviting Joe back to give us a nice follow-up to learn more about that. And remember to grab those handouts. I did mention that we have 2 case studies available for you. The first one is our Butler case study for the Butler County Federated Library System in Pennsylvania, and how TLC was able to diligently work to restore their data in a ransomware attack. And the second case study that's available is for Sullivan Bosse's up in New York. When New York's Education Law 2D passed, it placed additional and more stringent requirements on security for any vendors working with school data. And so we were able to move them into the TLC cloud services and maintain that compliance. So a great case study to read there. Both are worth the read. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us. You'll get an email follow-up tomorrow and letting us know or letting you know that the recording is available, and you can always respond to that with any questions that you may have. So that is what we have for you here today. Joe, thank you so much for your presentation. And Justin, thank you so much for jumping in on the questions at the end. And hopefully we will see everybody next time on Webinar Wednesday, if not sooner, at TLCU. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.